Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a foundational piece of American history. Honestly, it's a story so deeply woven into the fabric of the nation, it is going to completely change how you view the entire timeline of the United States. We're exploring the deep roots of the Muslim narrative right here in America.
Okay, let's dive into this. When most of us think about Islam in America, our minds, they usually jump straight to the present. We picture modern highways, towering skyscrapers, and contemporary Islamic centers. But what if the story didn't begin in the modern era? What if it started much, much earlier than we thought?
Let's actually take that a step further. What if Muslims were here long before those modern mosques were ever even built? It's a pretty fascinating thought, right? Because behind the familiar historical tales of pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock and revolutionaries fighting for independence, there's a parallel story running right alongside them the entire time.
Which brings us to part one, the untold American story, moving way beyond pilgrims and presidents.
If we look past the standard textbook narratives, we find a history that's quietly but firmly woven into the early American experience. And to be clear, this isn't just an explainer about religion. It's about identity, freedom, migration, and the incredibly complicated history of America itself. It's a remarkably human story about people navigating an entirely new and, let's be honest, often hostile world.
Let's step back a bit to part two, roots before modern America, specifically looking at the Atlantic world.
To truly understand this, we have to travel back in time, long before any modern immigration waves, straight into the dark era of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer depth of culture and knowledge the individuals brought to the Americas already possessed. We're talking about intense Quranic study, high Arabic literacy, and deep African education. They definitely weren't blank slates. They were scholars, teachers, and people with absolutely unwavering faith. I want you to pause for just a second here. Try to imagine being taken thousands of miles away from your home, and suddenly your language is taken away. The most basic human ability to communicate with the world around you is instantly stripped from you in an entirely unfamiliar land. Your freedom is taken away. You're forced into a brutal new reality where you have absolutely zero control over your own life and your own destiny. And perhaps most devastatingly of all, your family may be taken away. The sheer physical and emotional loss experienced during the transatlantic slave trade is totally heartbreaking and, frankly, almost impossible for us to fully comprehend today. But amidst all of that devastation, yet inside your memory remains something no one can easily remove: your belief. Despite being physically stripped of their homes, their freedom, and their loved ones, many enslaved African Muslims held fiercely on to their faith. It acted like an unbreakable, intangible connection to exactly who they were. Now, to really grasp the weight of this history, we have to look at a single, extraordinary human life. That brings us to part three, the story of Omar, a voice from the 19th century.
Let's trace the journey of Omar ibn Said. Born and highly educated in West Africa in the late 1700s, he was captured in the early 1800s and violently brought to the United States. But Omar completely shatters the stereotypes a lot of people might have about enslaved individuals. He could read and write, and in 1831, he actually produced his own autobiography in Arabic, leaving historians this incredibly profound first-hand account of his life.
So, the crucial point is this. Omar's autobiography proves beyond a doubt that early Muslims were an undeniable, educated human voice in early America. They were human beings with education, memories, families, cultures, and beliefs. They were never just names or numbers on a ship's manifest. Let's fast forward slightly to part four, debating religious freedom during the founding era.
So America's founding story obviously places a massive amount of importance on religious liberty. But it raises a really critical question. Who was actually included in that vision of freedom? When the founders were drafting the First Amendment and establishing these protections, how did they actually understand Islam? Were Muslims even considered in this grand experiment of freedom?
While the historical record shows a very complex relationship, it was an active mix of curiosity and discussion on one side and criticism and debate on the other. It was never simply pure admiration, and actually, scratch that, it wasn't total rejection either. Different historical figures encountered Islamic ideas in very different ways, making it an active, complicated conversation permanently woven into the larger American debate about government and religious diversity.
All right, moving into the 19th and 20th centuries, we have Part 5, the Modern American Mosaic, looking at immigration and growth.
As massive immigration waves began to radically transform the demographic landscape, people arrived from all over the Middle East, South Asia, Europe, and Africa. And modern identities formed right alongside those already here. We're talking African American, Arab American, converts, and incredibly mixed cultural backgrounds. These diverse groups hit the ground running. They built families, opened businesses, established organizations, and built the mosques we see today, constantly expanding the American dream.
Over generations, something absolutely profound happened. Islam became not a foreign story happening somewhere else, but a deeply American story. This vibrant, living community simply cannot be reduced to a single ethnicity or culture. They are intrinsically woven right into the American DNA.
Suffering and resilience, migration and adaptation, struggle and achievement. This brilliantly illustrates how the Muslim narrative mirrors the overarching American journey. The history of this nation isn't made by one group alone. It's a massive tapestry woven from millions of individual stories, including those who carried their faith across oceans and survived unimaginable hardships to become part of the nation they now call home.
Which brings us to this final, powerful thought. If you want to understand America, you have to understand all of its stories. The Muslim story is undeniably one of them, with roots reaching much, much deeper than the standard textbooks suggest. So if this parallel history has been quietly woven into the fabric of the nation all along, you kind of have to wonder, how much more of our shared American story is still out there waiting to be uncovered? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.